Once again, we find ourselves underleveled and weak to fire. This challenge seems to be throwing the same few issues at me. Surprising considering how there were 150 plus options and I seem to get all the ones weak to wind or they're weak to fire. Will this trend in the challenge continue? Probably, but I don't really know. The early segments of this dungeon weren't much, but did have one or two, somewhere around that many, deaths. There were only 3, surprisingly, overall, across the whole dungeon, lowest in the series so far. The main issue of the dungeon early on were the enemies that resisted or nullified the moves of my party, only being able to hit for reliable damage on 2 elements and physical. It's not all that great, especially seeing as many of the enemies across the whole dungeon, not just the beginning, so it was a very similar problem later on too. But they would resist or nullify physical or fire, 2 of our reliable attacks that aren't almighty damage. However, because a lot of them resisted physical or fire, SP was a massively limiting resource because of the almighty attacks which I had being used a lot more often to make up for these very clear resistances that the enemies had throughout. So I have chosen to include all of the deaths there because I wanted to include them there where at the time of recording this voiceover and writing the script I had not watched through to see where all the deaths were. I know at the very least one was at the beginning and one was towards the end, however I'm not too sure on where the second one occurs, and while I could just throw it in later, do whatever with it, I'm choosing to include them all here to show that there was more than one failure throughout the whole thing, and it was to a variety of different enemies and not just the same few. But now we'll be moving on to the mid-boss itself, which was a threat. With power charge and then a strong physical skill, it could easily cause deaths if not planned for and dealt with properly. So my plan was to attack, heal and buff on the turns in which it would go for power charge, and then on the turns where it would attack, I would guard with everyone. Very simple strategy, but it's really effective and didn't rely on more random elements like finding physical mirrors, getting skills that will resist or provide me with a counter in some kind of way, like the various counter abilities. One I did have, but something that was too unreliable for a consistent strategy. So with this very simple strategy that I had come up with in about 5 minutes, the threat was very easily dealt with in a way which I had expected to be much more difficult because of the strength of the attack that it was using. The second half of this dungeon had a ton more enemies that would resist or nullify the attacks we had, even going as far to include ice within this, our final strong hitting elemental capability. However, where they were weak to one, they usually wouldn't resist or nullify more than one. So hitting most enemies was fairly simple with my team. However, there was one that was not. I don't actually remember the name of it, but it's one of those enemies that repels physical attacks and then absorbs fire, being only able to hit by ice and almighty, something that continued to further make the SP issue a limiting resource. But hey, once I finally made it to the top floor, or I keep saying top floor or something like that, it's really the final floor, because in this dungeon it's so much different to the rest in the fact that you go down floors instead of up them. But yeah, on this final floor, I had decided to go back, save, and then prepare to reach the level cap. So what I did here was get one below, as I typically do, at level 55, with moves that could heal and buff the team, and then also that would damage the boss, though I would realise one of those may not have been needed as much as the others, and one was crucial to victory. There was another death during this preparation phase, but it's something I've already included earlier on, so you're likely just seeing a leveling montage and then the enemy that I was talking about before. The boss was a high damaging mess, with a variety of different physical and magic skills of the highest variety. It could cause deaths really easily, so I had to go into this with a strategy once again. But before we talk about that strategy, I'm going to talk about all the different things the boss can do. So it has every elemental attack, the both single hitting version and multi-hitting version, and then a variety of different physical skills, all of which can cause many different problems, because you can either be crit by one and then it hits you again and you die, or some other variation of it hitting you with one strong physical skill and then being hit by another really strong skill as a result of that. Or the other way around, you get hit by a strong magical skill that's your weakness, and then it hits you with a strong physical skill and you die. But hey, so that's one of the things it can do. Sometimes it can use some of its almighty moves that are unique to it. Element Zero, which removes elemental resistances, Mute Ray, which deals damage and silences the party member it hits, and Galgulum Eyes, which reduces you to 1 HP. This thing was a threat because, well, there was almost no way to be hit by a move that isn't weak to you or will crit you outside of getting tons of magic and physical mirrors, or getting the Makarakan and Tetrakan skills, which would repel any attack, one of them being physical and one being magic, except for almighty attacks. My strategy involved high damage, power charge boosted physical attacks with defense and attack buffs from the protagonist and Teddy each, where possible, other moves were used to deal smaller amounts of damage to the boss, while healing enough to make sure that the whole team would survive, because this strategy relied on nearly every member of the party. There was an extremely close call in this fight at one point. However, since multiple party members had some kind of healing skill, the strategy was not interrupted too poorly, because a lot of the turns where it would just be do some damage with some random move would just be healing instead because of that near-death experience. But hey, the strategy wasn't interrupted too bad, so it was actually quite an effective one. This dungeon had its fair share of challenges, however, because in most cases I had spent time prior to those fights planning around what the enemy could do. Since the threats were, in my eyes, mainly just the two bosses, so I just planned them beforehand, which went well. However, the issue was more the things that I did not plan for, the random enemies scattered around because of their resistances and other things that made them a problem.